Hello, and welcome to Gaming with Soul, seeking soul through the lens of pop culture and gaming. My name is Jamie,
Hi, I'm Karen.
and on this episode, we are talking about, shapeshifters in general, not just werewolves.
Well, werewolves, we're kind of starting with that because it is October, Halloween season. So we diving into the spooky stuff. And werewolves are typically associated with spooky and Halloween and things like that. But rather than just limiting ourselves to this one little bracket, which is werewolves, we're just going to go the whole hog and look at shapeshifters in general.
Yep. So we're gonna touch on a bunch of different things.
Yes. Well, why don't we start with the simple fact that, I mean, most of us are familiar with the term lycanthrope. Now,
Yes.
the lycanthrope, I mean, this is a Greek-derived word, and I'll go into its origins in a little bit. But what shapeshifters now, the technical term is therianthrope. Therian meaning wild animal or beast, and of anthropy, which is human. So it's the combination of the two. When you look into wares, so werewolves, werebears and other wares that we're familiar with, the term were is actually an Old English word that just means adult human male. So basically man, wolf, man, bear, man, boar, whatever. So it's man boar. So yeah, it's therianthrope is the genetic term for all shapeshifters that can assume the form of an animal. The other term that sometimes is used is zoanthropy, but therianthropy tends to be the most common one. And basically a shapeshifter, now we're not talking about people that can turn into inanimate objects, but we're talking about the transformation between human and beast.
Beast and man.
Yeah, well, there's so much in our histories when it comes to shapeshifters and the therianthropes and such, but it's all through our mythology as well. I mean, a majority of the old world gods all could assume an animal form, at least one.
In Norse, it was more certain gods had a cloak or an object. Now, of course, Loki being the exception because he could just do things.
Yeah, that was his nature, though. He was just, he was slippery by nature, and the whole idea of shape-shifting it's a little bit slippery. When you look at a lot of the old world myths and stories about beings who assumed the form of animal, a lot of the time that was in order to escape. So there was this slippery, element of nature about being able to assume the form of an animal. I mean, let's start up. Let's look at the Greek mythology. Proteus, he was particularly known for this. Proteus would assume the form of an animal so he could get away and not have to tell somebody what the future was going to be, because Proteus could see the future. And people would come to him all the time, they'd tell me the future, because he was a seer, tell me the future. And he just didn't want to. So he would assume the form of an animal and bugger off. As one would. I mean, we spoke a little bit in the past about Metis, who was one of Zeus's one of his wives, one of the women he slept with, whatever. She was Athena's mother. Metis was an Oceanid. She was from one of the ocean titans. And she was known to be the mother of deep thought and the mother of deep wisdom, but she was also a shapeshifter as well. And this was when Zeus actually tricked her to assuming the form of a fly or a drop of water, and so he could eat her, so she wouldn't give birth to the child that was going to overthrow him. So there's a lot in the legends to say, yes, we will assume a form of an animal to get away from our predicament.
Odin does it once to get away. Specifically, he does it more than once. He does it once, turn to the form of an eagle to run from a mountain, and he turns into a snake at one point to avoid getting his head bashed in with an auger.
The kings of the gods would often, again, would assume the form of an animal either to observe to escape.
Yep.
Or to influence in some way. And influence can also mean have sex with,
Yeah.
because that, that happened a lot as well in
Hmm.
mythology. But the term lycanthrope, which is the werewolf term, actually comes from a Greek legend. There was a king by the name of Lycaon. Now, he was a king of the East, and Zeus came to visit him, and he didn't believe Zeus was all-seeing and all-knowing, as Zeus said he was. So, in order to prove this, Lycaon sacrificed a child and served it to Zeus for dinner. Now, in some of the legends, it was Lycaon's own child, because he had something like 50 kids, so just assumed that what's one, he doesn't care. And others,
Yeah.
it was just a sacrificed child. But when Zeus discovered, now there's some that he discovered before he ate, some it was or when he took the first mouthful, some it was later. Again, mythology, it depends on the story.
Yep.
But Zeus discovered, and he just flew into a rage. And as punishment, he turned Lycaon into a wolf and all of his children into wolves. Now, the earliest stories of being transformed into an animal was often, it was a form of punishment by the gods.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a similar story in Norse myth of when they bound Loki. They changed one of his sons into a wolf and then it turned and disemboweled his other son by his actual wife, not one of his mutant children by his mistress.
These slippery elements of these old world mythologies, but a lot of the time it was punishment. It was a curse, either because you pissed off a god or you pissed off a really powerful witch, shaman, medicine man, medicine woman. It was usually a wolf. And that brought rise to the werewolf legends, which are the ones that we are the most common today. Usually, if the gods had transformed you, into a wolf, it was permanent.
Yeah.
It was a permanent thing. There was some where it was a period of years, again, depending upon the lore, the story, 7, 9, 10, whatever, you turned into a wolf and you were stuck that way. It was usually done because you had committed an unspeakable act, like Lycaon killing this child. And it was usually the murder of an innocent. That was the normal.
Which in Loki's case was his punishment for tricking Hod into killing Balder. It was part of his punishment. It was part of his grand punishment.
I mean, there are other legends and stories about people who would don or make that change willingly. There were stories of the enchanted skins and belts, and we'll get into that in just a little bit.
Yeah, because that's heavy in Norse.
Yeah, so when we start going through the different things, it was, but yeah, it was either you wore the enchanted skin, you could drink a potion. There was ointments and things like that. There were some legends that said if you drank the water from a wolf's footprint. There were some legends that said if you slept under the full moon. All of these different things were, you could become a werewolf. Because again, wolves were the alpha predator at the time. I mean, yes, bears were around, but bears traditionally don't predate humans. If there's a bear attack, it is because territorial.
You got too close to its cubs.
Yeah, or it was a rogue and just a bear in a bad mood. They generally don't kill people for food. We're probably not good eating to them. Wolves, on the other hand, they're not above killing people. If they catch you on their own, a pack will take you down. In the old world, that was terrifying. Modern worlds, we're like, oh, look at the wolves. Oh, we'll be okay. But in the old days, again, because there's just not that many of them anymore. But they were top predators. When you go into literature, though, werewolves and shapeshifters tend to be their own race. I mean, it's very big in D&D. They have their own classes. In a lot of literature, especially modern day writings and things, werewolves and shapeshifters of all descriptions tend to be able to breed, tend to be able to have their own children. I mean, not quite Hotel Transylvania, where you've got the hairy You know,
I haven't
the
seen
wolf
that
family.
actually.
Awesome movies, the Hotel
Fair.
Transylvania, but there is a werewolf family, and
Ah,
the voice of the father werewolf, I think, is Steve Buscemi, something along
love
those
Steve
lines.
Buscemi.
But yeah, they constantly have kids. They have so many kids all the time because they're breeding like puppies.
Yeah,
It's very, very cute. But I mean, I know in the Anita Blake and also in the Sookie Stackhouse books, shapeshifters could breed. I know in the
yep.
Anita Blake books, though, shapeshifters actually having babies was really complicated.
Pulling it back to, I'm pretty sure she took some from Vampire the Masquerade, werewolf in the werewolf books from their breeding with werewolf breeding is super complicated.
Mm. Well, the thing is in the Anita Blake universe, shapeshifters have to change on the full moon. They are bound to the full moon. There are 3 nights every month they have to change. And
Yep.
and this is something that is in all shapeshifter lore. The transformation is violent because you've
Yeah.
literally got to, and I mean, it's actually something that's only just been brought up in modern day storytelling. In the past, transformation was something that they never really touched on. It was like literally, bang, God turned you into a wolf, or you are
Yeah.
under the spell and he transformed. They never go into details, but because of CGI, they can now
Yeah.
bring to life these horrific transformation sequences, you've got to imagine that's what it would be like. Your
Oh yeah.
bones have got to change form, your skin's got to change shape and grow hair all over, and your face structure has got to change dramatically. And it is always depicted as excruciatingly painful.
So if you think about it, magic could make it painless. Like you could just move
It
from one
depends
to
on the
another.
transformation. I mean, you look at the True Blood series and how the werewolves and shapeshifters and that transformed. It was literally just whoop, done. It was
Yep.
instant, just smooth, transform, whatever. Whereas you
Yep.
go into the Anita Blake one, you know, there's graphic descriptions about the sounds and
Yeah.
you know
That's a
that
lot
you
of them.
can see the pain and that they're in. It takes time as their body goes through it. So
Yep.
it's whether or not we take it from the more, okay, if this was to be real quotation marks, we would expect it to be more that physiological change
Yeah.
compared to the whole magic. Today, 1 minute you're that, and the next minute you just slide into something else. And again, in some law too, it can be a very messy process.
Yep. Yeah.
And the whole thing too is if you became a werewolf, unless it was a curse that had a time limit on it, anywhere it was a permanent deal. If you
Mm-hmm.
turn into a shapeshifter or you are a shapeshifter, it is a lifetime deal. Generally speaking, it makes you harder to kill.
Yeah.
Um, Harder to kill in human form, but even harder in animal form.
Yep.
And a lot of the law will say if you transform, it will actually heal your wounds.
Yeah. Because like in D&D, that the healing your wounds doesn't happen, but you're just immune to non-magical weapons completely
Yeah.
and other crazy things.
There's a lot of that. It's like if you shoot them, again, talking different type, modern type pop culture law, if you shot them, they would heal that very quickly. The only things that were really deadly to them, again, silver.
Yep.
Not so much in modern day pop culture, but in ancient law, wolfsbane. A
Mm-hmm.
potion made of wolfsbane was either supposed to kill the wolf or cure
Or,
you of
yep.
being a werewolf.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or
So,
cure the lycanthropy, which doesn't make any sense.
but yeah, we're talking old law Celtic type medicine man, medicine woman, shaman type magic that comes up. Druidic is probably a better term. It's very druidic that comes up through the Celtic. Fire, lots of it, tends to kill most supernatural things. Whereas one thing too is, again, in some law, it's like if you cut off a shapeshifter's leg, again, in the transformation, it would grow back. But if you cut it off and burnt it, it wouldn't.
Yep.
Now, if you cut it off above the burn, then theoretically it should grow back again.
Yeah.
But again, it depends on the law, which law you want to get into with that. But yeah, I mean, that's your werewolves. It's interesting though, as wares pop up, they tend to, with the exception of, again, things like gaming, and with the exception of the bear, they tend to be canids. Africa, their legends are of the were hyena.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we know hyenas are not dogs. They're not actually canids. They are closely related to the mongoose, I believe. But they are more dog-like in appearance. So unless you know the zoological DNA genetic differences, you would assume looking at a hyena, it's kind of dog-like.
Yeah. It's been thought to be a dog for the very long time.
Yeah, and it's only in recent years that we no, it's not a dog. It's actually more closely related to the mongoose and blah 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 blah. Yeah. Okay. Simple thing is whereas werewolves tend to be humans that have been transformed into wolves, the were hyena is a hyena that can transform into a human. And whereas the werewolves were known to be notorious, evil, savage killers, the were hyenas are seen as true evil, because the hyena is such a hated animal.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely loathed animal. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Number one, yes, they are savage. They are deadly. The bite of a hyena, it has one of the strongest jaws of mammals on the face of the planet at the moment. They're absolutely incredible. Known to be a little bit of a coward. If they're on their own and they're up against something that's bigger than them, they will fuck off.
Yep.
But there's something small, they will take you. They will take you. They are known to be greedy because they will steal. They steal food. They will steal the kills off other animals. They will fight amongst themselves over food and things like that too. So it's really quite rancid. They were known for causing and spreading disease.
Yeah.
And this is because they are one of the very, very few animals, and forgive me, there's a storm that's just kicked up outside. One of the very few animals on the face of the planet that can actually eat rotten flesh.
Yeah.
So they can eat rotting meat. So the germs and the bacteria that come with a hyena is really rather repulsive. The other thing that they're known for too is digging up the dead.
Yeah. Well, they're scavengers.
They are scavengers. So if you don't bury your dead deep enough, the hyena will dig them up and eat them. No matter how long, if there's still some meat on it, hyena will eat it.
Mm-hmm.
They can eat any of it. Now, the were hyena, there was a term that came up because, again, Africa is a very, very superstitious culture and country. Lots of the tribal laws, lots of the old belief systems. Throw into that the fact that the Christians and the French and all that were trying to take over and spread throughout Africa through the times too. So there was the rise of this term, which is called the Buddha or the Boda. And they were people who could control animal spirits to cause illness. But there was also a nomadic group that went through Africa. Well, they were nomadic for a while until they settled, and they were the better Israelites. Now, when you really look into the legends of the were hyena, again, it's one of those don't trust outsiders. We can't trust outsiders. We can't trust people who aren't part of our tribe. Tricksters. It's very much fear the stranger, fear the stranger, fear the stranger. Because eventually the better Israelites built their own temples, built their own buildings. They were actually really well renowned as smiths, metalsmiths, and potterers. So the locals who, there was a lot of Christian that was going through that stage through as well. And the better Israelites were Jews going through Africa. And again, because they were actually very gifted, they were seen as being sorcerers. That they can transform. They can transform metal into blade, or they can transform raw ore into metal and metal into blade. They can take wet clay and turn it into fine pottery. They must be able to transform themselves. And so they actually started calling the better Israelites the Buddha. And it got to a point that even now in today's world, in certain elements in Africa, especially around Ethiopia, Sudan, places like that, the term Buddha, calling someone a Buddha, is deeply insulting, deeply, deeply insulting. And in some countries in Africa, it is illegal to declare someone a were hyena because it became such a problem.
I can see that.
Such a problem. That leads us a little bit into the werebears and the Norse. So I know you want to go all about that one, so I'll leave the werebears to you.
So in Norse cultures, there are, people use the widespread term berserker. I'm going to go on record right now to say berserker only refers to bear-skinned warriors, and the problem is a lot of people are like, all berserkers are berserkers, and it's like, no, there were 3 different divisions. There were the bear-skinned, the wolf-skinned, and the boar-skinned. And they all have their own names. Berserker was just the bear-skinned. Some believe that with shamanistic help, like with the help of the local shaman, they would transform into a bear during combat or before combat. There's a story of one of the most legendary berserkers who would turn into a bear and fight for his king, just killing people with his bare paws, with his forepaws, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it talks about before battle, they would foam at the mouth and gnarl and chew on the iron rims of their shields. They wore bear coffs, which is I'm probably pronouncing that word wrong, but that's fine. It is a hat that is just a bear head that sits on top of your head, and the furs come down. And like I could even argue that that's probably why people thought they turned into bears, because Norse didn't really write a whole lot down, and the people who did were probably like, there were big bear men coming at us.
But yeah, I mean, you see that in Valhalla. It was part of the Berserker pack. You actually had that full bear head with the part that came down on the side as part of your armor.
It was like a big religious thing too to be a berserker. Like you wouldn't fight for 3 days after Yule, because that was a religious observance. They were laid out on their bearskins prior to their funeral rites, stuff like that. The wolf skins, I cannot pronounce the word. It's like Ulf Dinar, were like specifically fighters for Odin. They would fight in packs. They would tear people down. They would wear wolf skins on their heads, so people would think they transform into wolves. Mm-hmm. And they would hunt as packs. And there's very little known about the boars. Like today, researching for this is the first time I've ever even heard of it. But it makes sense because Freya and Frey were big into boars and whatnot. So it would be the Vanir's version of berserkers.
It's one of those things that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, just how ferocious a wild boar is.
Oh, God, wild boar will kill you. Not even think twice about it.
Uh-huh. And just like, oh, it's a pig. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah, no, it's not. They're very scary. But like in D&D, werebears are one of my favorite wares because they're the only good ones, and they're like super friendly all the time, which I find hilarious. But yeah, so that's like the Norse were big on, you wear the pelt of the animal, you would become said animal when you needed to. Yeah. Especially in combat.
And that actually ties into, because there is a lot of very, very old anthropological history about humans would wear the skins of an animal in order to imbue the energies and the powers of that animal.
Yep.
And that goes for any animal. It's still with the shamans and the medicine men and the medicine women, they would use parts of an animal, the bone, they would wear. I mean, the Native Americans were known for wearing the feathers, so they had the sight of the eagles and things like that. So we could, again, imbue the power of the animal to take on aspects of the animal. With the berserkers, there were also talk that they used to drink potions. It was something that helped induce a state.
Or drink potions, smoke specific herbs, stuff like that.
Get very drunk.
Get very drunk.
Get very, very drunk and go. I mean, again, you get a bunch of very, very large, Northern European men that have drunk a lot. That you pull back those inhibitions, make them believe, or they believe with all they have that they are now imbuing this power. And
Yeah.
so they live from that space, and it really is the proof of mind
Yeah.
over matter.
And
Uh,
it, like the word hamask. I'm terrible at pronouncing Norse words. I really need to get better at it. Is there, it translates roughly into change forms. It's also where people derive the words go berserk, but technically,
mhm,
again, berserk is only bear, blah 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 blah.
yeah.
But it roughly translated to change forms or enter a state of fury. And it's said by scholars that when they would do this, when they would go into this state, the fire and steel couldn't hurt them. Nothing could stop them. They were just unstoppable killing machines.
But they were also werebears are one of the few that were known to be particularly intelligent in their animal form.
Yeah.
They would have human-like intelligence. And again, the legends saying that they could use tools and things probably came back to, again, the berserkers wearing their bear
Mhm.
hoods and their bear heads.
Oh, yeah. Because you'd see him come at you with an axe and you'd be like, that bear has an axe. It's terrifying.
Exactly. And again, we're talking in battle and mud and all those sorts. It's hard to see. It's not
Yeah.
exactly like there was somebody up the front with a video camera that they could all watch at the end of it. It's literally these guys that survived weren't in the fray of it, saw some guys, these big, fearsome things that look like bears with axes. Oh, they were bears with axes.
Uh-huh. Especially if you consider that, like, your average Norseman was 6 foot or above, and your average Englishman barely topped 5 feet, or like
Yeah.
5.5 feet.
And that had a lot to do with the meat in the diet.
Yeah.
The Northern Europeans had very high protein diets. They tend to grow bigger. Whereas there was a lot more agriculture and such in the UK and in England and Scotland and Ireland. So there's just, it bred them big,
Yeah.
bred them meaty, bred them strong. Yeah, I mean, they were always known to be, the bear was always known to be the most ferocious of all the shapeshifters, of all the animals. Again, it's biggest land animal, biggest land predator.
Yep.
So it has this big element. However, in Australia, we have the warrigal. And the warrigal are, depending upon the legends and which tribe you look at, the warrigal are generally dingoes. But there is also some stories where there are wares with the thylacine, which is the Tasmanian tiger, and the Tasmanian devil.
Yep. I started laughing because another reference popped into my head as soon as you said dingo, and I was holding it back.
What, the
And
dingo ate your baby?
Yeah, the dingo ate my baby popped in my head, and I was like, "Nah, that distracts." So I'm not allowed to say those anymore. So
Poor Lindy, she got such a bloody bum rush over that. But yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I found it really hard to find any real lore on the warrigal, other than they were supposedly there's a tribe or a tribe of indigenous where they have the warrigal, and were giant dingoes that could stand up on the back feet like man and act like man, and they were intelligent and protective of the tribe and those sorts of things. In Indigenous Australia, also though, there was also the York or the Yak, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And the Yak or the York was a shape-changing mermaid.
huh?
Had the bottom half of a fish. Now, not like typical mermaids, either very, very wide, flat bottom part of the body or particularly long, almost serpentesque-like. But the top half was a human torso, bottom half is some kind of marine creature, hair was seaweed.
Yeah.
In some legends, they believe she was the daughter of the rainbow serpent, who is the Indigenous Australia's creator god. And she could control the weather, but she was known for being able to transform into any animal that she wished. But she was very well known for transforming into things like crocodiles, snakes, fish and swordfish in particular, and dragonflies.
Yep. I have a tangential question because this just popped in my head while you're talking about Indigenous Australia creation myth.
Okay.
And it's D&D related.
Okay.
Do you believe Chult is based on, or is there a chance that Chult is based on Australia?
Oh, after playing through Chult, I would say no.
Okay.
Because Chult is far more jungle.
Yeah,
We have some
that's fair.
jungle, or not jungle, we have some rainforest in Queensland. But the majority of Australia, we're desert. The majority of us
Yeah,
is
that makes
desert.
sense. I was just wondering with like it's people though, like the people that are there and whatnot.
Chult hit me as African.
Yeah, that's
It hit
fair.
me as very African or very South
Madagascar, maybe.
American, one or the other. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was wet and yeah, yes, dinosaurs, okay, but the way the people and everything, I know when I DM'd it, I had Africa in mind when I was
that
doing
makes a lot
Chult.
of sense. That makes a lot more sense. I was just wondering because like you talk about the rainbow serpent, blah blah blah, and I know
Mhm.
that was a part of Cholt's history was like
Mhm.
Dende the night serpent, although he's not a rainbow serpent. He's a giant bag of dicks. And
She, Dendar is a
she
she. Yeah.
fair.
The
She is a
rainbow.
giant bag. I apologize for assuming Dendar's a gender. She is a giant bag of dicks.
Yeah, no. There is a lot of serpent-esque in creator myths. It's either a serpent or a dragon.
I suppose.
The eternal cosmic dragon was always one that keeps coming up to me.
Yeah.
From some of the old predating Asian myths. And to me, that was, again, a lot of that comes, it's spread through Islander. So there was some great creator, either serpent or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, but yes, the York, she could also, because she could control the weather, they thought she was truly born of the creator, which was the rainbow serpent. In the Middle East, the most famous shapeshifters from the Middle East tend to predate Islam, and they are the jinn.
Yay,
Either the
Jin.
jinn or the djinn, depending upon how you want to pronounce them. Basically, guys, these are the genies.
Yep.
But
I've always heard it without the D,
yeah,
but
it depends on, it again depends on the region, it depends on the dialect, it depends on the
yeah,
translations. This is old stuff, so it varies as it comes through the stories.
fair enough.
Now, the jinn they're fascinating. I mean, what modern day stories have turned them into it's very degrading, the whole genie in the bottle kind of a deal.
Yep.
Having a jinn trapped in a bottle or a lamp, if you let them out, you need to run.
Yeah.
They're not, basically someone tricked them and trapped them, and they're not bound to that bottle or lamp. So if you let them out, unless they're feeling particularly benevolent and want to reward you for letting them out, you'll be lucky to get a favor.
You'll be lucky to get out of there with your damn life.
Well, actually, it depends. The jinn were not always seen as evil. They were
Yeah.
known for having really bad tempers.
That's more what I was going for, is a really bad temper. You let him out of the bottle and he's just gonna smack you around until he realizes that you're not the thing that put him in the bottle.
Yeah. So yeah, they were. But yes, there were very evil ones. There were plenty that were pretty meh, whatever, just served their own purpose.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could be trapped. There's a great story of a particular man who let a jinn out, and this jinn was going to go on this rampage. And he ultimately said, "I don't believe you, this giant thing, actually ever fit into this bottle," and tricked him to go back into the bottle and prove it, and trapped him again.
Yeah.
But the jinn, they can. I mean, yes, we know them as being able to be, mist, dust, fog. They can be in human form. They can be half mist, half fog, half human. But they are also known for being shapeshifters. They can assume the form of any animal that they choose.
Yay.
And yes, had great magic. They will only be seen if they want you to see them.
Yep.
And in the very, very olden time, they were prayed to for bountiful crops. People would ask for their favors. Again, fertility, protection, food.
Yep.
Food was big. Was a big, big one in the old days. So the jinn were fantastic.
I was gonna say the only Jin story I know of is from Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Mm-hmm.
he talks a bit about there's a man gets into a taxi and it happens to be driven by a djinn, and he figures out he's a djinn. They have a romantic spat, and then when the man's life was terrible, he worked for his brother. His brother bossed him around, called him an idiot all the time, was stealing money from him, stuff like that. And when he woke up the next morning, the gift the djinn left him was a brand new life as a taxi cab driver.
Yay.
And he's like, I know it's not, or like there was a letter or something saying like, I know it's not much. And he was super happy to leave his brother's employ and become a taxi cab driver.
Back to the Americans, and there are many, many legends around shapeshifters and the Native Americans.
Yeah.
They're skinwalkers. Now, skinwalkers, out of respect, I will not mention their name. Yeah. I have found it, but the Native Americans, it is a big part of their right that you do not mention the name of the skinwalkers because it is ill fortune. It's also disrespectful. So we will refer to them purely as the skinwalkers. There are other shape-shifting stories in the Native Americans. I mean, the mother bear, there are legends around her. There is another legend with a man, but he'd had 4 successful kills all day. But each time he'd had a kill, some ferocious man came and stole his kill. And then it was like 4 times, 4 deer got stolen from him. There was something wrong with this man. And on the next day or later, he found the man, beheaded him, and found out it was actually a bear. The bear had taken human form and had been stealing all his kills. So there were lots of legends about that. But the actual skinwalkers, now True Blood touches in on this just a little bit, where shapeshifter can now in the True Blood universe, the natural shapeshifters could assume any animal that they've seen. Yeah. So it was like Sam from the thing would assume the form of a collie because it was a big, strong dog, but it was seen to be a friendly dog, so people weren't on guard with it. But in the True Blood universe, if you had killed a person, you could actually transform into a person. So you could actually shapeshift into another human being. That was how they did it in True Blood. In the skinwalking tradition, to my discovery, now, again, I'm not an expert. I have done some research on the history on a topic we wanted to discuss. Generally speaking, in order to become shapeshifters or skinwalkers, these were powerful medicine men or medicine women that had somehow been corrupted. Had been corrupted by the power. Now, usually that corruption, it's associated with dark forces, and you could only become the skinwalker if you had taken the life of someone close to you. So if you had killed a loved one, a family member, then you could take on this form as a skinwalker and become a shapeshifter. Now, these elements, of course, are to be very, very different to having a shamanic vision, a vision quest, where they would embody the animal. This is not someone who is just going on a shamanic journey. They were talking about literally transforming through black magic and blood magic. Now, shamans going on spirit soul quests, animal vision quests, that is something I'll discuss a little bit later. But again, that's not what we're actually talking about this the legends of people actually physically being able to do that. France is interesting, and I'm going to leave that when I cover the actual history, because there's some stories that came up in France. I'll weave this one in because it was the most notable one. There was a story written in the 12th century about a Baron Bisclaveret who used to vanish everywhere. Now, even his wife didn't know where he went. And eventually he confides to his wife that he is a werewolf. And his wife, and tells his wife that his clothes were the secret to his transformation. So his wife, however, runs off and tells her lover, who was this knight that she was having an affair with. And after some thought, they decide to get rid of the count or the baron. They will steal his clothes. So he cannot transform back into the human, which without his clothes, he cannot. Now, the wife and the knight get married. They have some kids. Years later, the wolf comes back. actually, no, the wolf comes back and bites off her nose. The werewolf comes back and bites off her nose. Then they have a bunch of kids, and the kids are all born without noses because he cursed her for her infidelity and betraying him and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I'll go into the history of France a little bit more in a bit, because there's a whole new branch that goes off from that. In Slavic mythology, there were creatures called the Leshy, and the Leshy were mischievous woodland spirits that could transform into any plant or any animal they wanted. Now, the difference with the Leshy is they were not restricted by size. They could become an insect or a blade of grass, or an elephant or a giant tree.
Yeah.
And literally they would do this to lead humans astray, because they were mischievous woodland spirits and they were bored, and that's what mischievous woodland spirits did. How to thwart a Leshy. This is an interesting one. How to thwart a Leshy. Wear your clothes inside out and your shoes on the wrong feet.
Okay.
And that will protect you from a Leshy. So if you're in the Slavic forests, turn your clothes inside out, put your shoes on the wrong feet, you'll be safe from the mischievous spirits.
Hey, Jim, leave that one alone. He's obviously got bigger problems. Let's not mess with him.
Yeah, probably. Now, of course, and of course, in Japan, though, they had the very, very, very benevolent, for the most part, Kitsune.
Kitsune. It's one of my favorite
I know you
D&D
love
races.
Kitsune.
Well, one of my favorite Pathfinder races. They're not in D&D. They're in Pathfinder.
What do you know of the Kitsune?
I don't know a lot of their legend and their lore, unfortunately, because you said you had a bunch of that. So I was actually going to look it up before this. And then you were like, oh, I got a bunch. And I'm like, okay, cool. But I do know, like, in at least in Pathfinder, they're tricksters a bit. They like to play pranks, harmless pranks, but pranks nonetheless. They have a nose for mischief. They can transform between a human and a wolf hybrid form. Or not a wolf, fox hybrid.
Yep.
Fox hybrid. Sorry, I misspoke. A fox hybrid form. And if, like, of course, D&D, there are feats and whatnot. If you take certain feats, you can go all the way to a fox. And then there are feats that you can gain multiple tails, which make you more magical and powerful.
Which is part of the legend as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there is up to a nine-tailed fox, which is very big in their legends. It's actually based on what Naruto is partially based on.
Yep, I've got that. I've got that little bit of that little juicy bit of that mythology.
Yes, so that's like, I know a little bits here and there. I also know it appeared in Majora's Mask. There's a Kitsune mask you could wear.
Yep.
I believe that's the one that made animals follow you. It's been forever since I played it.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, generally, Kitsune is just the name of the Japanese fox.
Yeah.
Now, the Kitsune, they were actually, it splits into normal foxes and then the human foxes. So the Kitsune basically, again, like the were-hyena, are foxes that can transform into human. So they are, and literally they are just a fox. It's just a fox, and they were revered so much that they were seen to have all these human attributes. Unlike the were-hyena, though, the Kitsune generally was seen as very benevolent creatures. Now, there are two types. There was the Zenzo, and the Zenzo were messengers of the goddess Inyari, and they were messengers and protectors of the Shinto temples. But then there were also the Yako, and the Yako were malicious. They were the tricksters. They killed livestock and destroyed crops.
Yeah.
But they were seen generally as good and benevolent and revered for their wisdom and their cunning. They were seen to be these beautiful creatures. Now, it wasn't just Japan, though. These legends actually spread through different areas in China, Korea, and even through into India. So it's a widespread. The name changes slightly through the regions, but they're all different variations of it. Now,
Yeah.
generally, when the kitsune would transform into a human, it would take on the form of a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
And sometimes in the form of a beautiful woman, she stayed in the form of the woman because she actually wanted to marry well, or she actually wanted to experience real love. So she would assume and stay in her human form. If there was a woman who was seen to be extremely ambitious, think more of herself, want to be bigger and better than what a woman could be, or she exhibited lewd, seductive, wild woman kind of behavior, she was labeled a kitsune. There were belief that they could possess people's dreams. And the thing is if a kitsune made a promise to you, it would do everything in its power to keep it.
Yeah.
Very, very, very important that they would keep their promises. Now, as for the tails, they would grow a second, they were a true kitsune, they would grow a second tail at 100 years.
Yeah.
And then if they reached 1,000 years, they would grow 9 tails to become the nine-tailed fox, which is actually called, where was it? Kyubi no Kitsune. Now, Kyubi no Kitsune, the nine-tailed fox was either gold or silver, and it was godlike. It was revered, godlike power. They could see everything, they could hear everything, and they influenced the world for good. If an evil Kyubi no Kitsune manifested, an evil one could destroy the world.
I believe that's what the basis of Naruto's nine-tailed fox was, is he was trying to destroy the world.
In reflection to Pokemon and Digimon, who both had the nine-tailed fox. I mean, Pokemon has 9 tails.
9 tails,
which is the Vulpix evolution. But in Digimon, I think it was the 3rd saga, there was a yellow fox Pokemon, a Digimon called Renamon, who digivolved into Cubimon, which is Kyubi no Kitsune. And then I think she became Taomon, I think was her ultimate. But Cubimon literally did Foxtail Inferno, where she spread her tail out and there was a fireball that came from the ends of all of her tails, which is very much Kyubi no Kitsune. Sorry?
The Naruto nine-tailed fox also did things with fire, and sort of, at least his chakra energy was red and fiery and stuff like that.
Yeah, Kitsune is typically associated, when it becomes the Kyubi no Kitsune, is definitely associated with fire. Whereas before that, I think they're more earthy than anything else. But yeah, generally beautiful, lovely, lovely creatures, unless you're unfortunate enough to find a bad one. And I think that we've done those ones. That leaves me with one last one. Sorry?
Another touch on Kitsune. They were also in Magic the Gathering. In Kamigawa, which was a set I loved growing up, they had a lot of cards that were Kitsune. I don't remember them being called Kitsune, but there was like, I forget his proper name, but it's like the 8.5 tails. He had a proper name, but he was known as his name, the 8.5 tails, because apparently like one of his tails got cut in half and stuff like that. And so they were like an entire race in Magic the Gathering as well, in Kamigawa. But Kamigawa is based on Japan, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Again, because the kitsune is such a big part of the culture. It's been so intrinsically woven into the culture for such a long time. I mean, it's also, having the women referred to as the kitsune, it's where, you see the girls with the animal ears. They're always, the Japanese girls in the modern day, they'll wear a headband with animal ears on them because they want to be called a kitsune. There is that desire to be thought of as rebellious.
Yeah.
Because if you were again in the old days, to be called a kitsune as a woman would be like calling a woman today Lilith.
Yeah.
Just it's that wild raw essence which they want to embody. I mean, yes, there's a whole fashion trend around the animals and wearing ears and tails and things like that, but it does have a lot of its origins in the kitsune. It's not the only reason it's done, but that is part of where those legends come from.
Yeah.
Now, again, there are so many, and we could just keep getting lost down these. But rather than going over all of them, because we haven't got time, one
Fair.
last one I do want to cover is the Selkies. Now,
Sulkies.
now the Selkies are primarily Celtic, but there
Yep.
are elements of Selkie or Silky, again, different dialects, different interpretations that go all the way up the north coast of Europe to Norse. So
Yep.
when we look at Norway and
Yep.
Sweden, it goes all the way up there too. So for those who are not aware, Selkie are the seal folk.
Mm-hmm.
In Scottish law, they were called the seal folk. They are very, very closely tied into the Fae. So
Yeah.
they're very, very fairy-esque. The
Yep.
beliefs were the seals had this life under the sea that was equivalent to the life that we had on land. And
Mm-hmm.
certain types of seals, when they would beach themselves, would take off their seal clothes, and lo and behold, inside there was a woman or a man.
Yep.
Now, the Selkies are known specifically for being very gentle, very peaceful, and typically very tragic. There's a
Yeah.
lot of sad stories, and there's stories to say that a lot of the children that are drawn to the sea, were born of or have Selkie in their bloodlines, because
Mm-hmm.
one of the big old stories was a sailor would find a seal skin either on the beach or on the rocks or whatever, and would take it thinking, either not knowing what it was, and it's just like, oh, it's a seal skin, I can sell this, or they knew what it was and did it deliberately and would steal the Selkie's seal skin. Now, there are some legends that say if you own that Selkie's skin, that Selkie is basically, it's enslaved to you until you give it
Yeah.
its skin back. There are some legends that say if you steal the skin of a Selkie woman, she will be compelled to marry the first man that crosses her path. Absolutely compelled. She will have to do it. So yeah, they saw it as this way of tricking, again, usually as beautiful women
Yeah.
who would assume this human form from their animal form and would end up being enslaved to some local.
Yeah.
And then if she was to ever get her seal skin back, she'd just put it back on Dispirited Wave and you'd never see her again. If she'd had children, she would have left them behind.
Yeah.
So there was loads and loads of legends about that. But there were also male Selkie as well. And there was a
Mm-hmm.
legend that said if you went to the edge of the sea and a woman cried 7 tears into the sea, a male Selkie would appear to her and show her kindness and seduce her, and they'd have some good old raunchy time. There was a lot of stories that if a woman had been unfaithful to her husband, and especially if it was a young, attractive man, she had been seduced by a Selkie.
Yeah.
Basically, the male Selkies, they lived to be amorous and seduce unhappy women. They were it was unhappy women.
Yeah.
Very, very much about coming on and showing them love.
I know the name Sulky well, but I didn't know a lot of the lore. My experience with Sulky, the thing I knew about them is, one, I know they're I believe they're a big part of Irish history, aren't they? Like a big
It's
part of
huge in
Irish lore.
Scotland. Really, really big
Scotland.
in Scotland, but it is all through the UK.
Yeah,
It was
because I
Scottish
know.
Druidic law was the primary, because that's why they were called the Seal folk
Fair enough.
or Selkie folk.
I know there was a book series, and I forget the name of the book series, that a friend of mine was having me read about post-apocalyptic, like our world after nukes had gone off and everything was post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And Britain, like what was left of Britain, was still trying to invade Scotland and Ireland and all that. And they were being repelled by sulkies, like actual people who were mutated into seal folk.
Wow.
And would like the ship would go sailing over to attack the island, and all of a sudden it'd sail right into mist, and all these sulkies would jump up on board and attack them and stuff like that.
Wow. I haven't seen that one. There is actually supposedly a short movie called Selkie that I found, but I didn't get a chance to watch. And yeah, it is a huge part of folklore and legend. Again, the Fae the Fae aspect of anything that has those Celtic druidic origins, will, especially through the British Isles and those areas, will have those Selkie as part of their legends.
Okay.
And that's called the Finn folk. And the Finn folk were antagonistic and violent. And whereas the Selkie were gentle and often tragic, the Finn folk were kind of the opposite. They would steal people and take them, marry them and then steal them, take them to be their partners and husbands and wives below the sea.
Yeah.
Force them to marry them. They would kidnap people. They were horrible, horrible creatures. Every culture there are shapeshifters, and I could just keep going and keep going and keep going, but we'll leave those, because those I found were some of my favorites anyway, some of the most interesting. But I know there's oodles more out there, but I kind of ran out of time, and I don't think we'll have enough time to cover everything. If we look at cave art, cave art that's tens of thousands of years old actually has these human-animal hybrid creatures depicted. And this is from cave art all over the world. So shape-shifting and morphing into animals has long been part of our history, even if it is just from that storytelling perspective.
Yep.
Yes, the stories of the Berserkers cover this quite well, because from the earliest elements of history, mankind would wear the skin of an animal he killed in order to embody the power of that animal. So he could see, have the eyes of the eagle, so he could, have the strength of the bear or the cunning of the fox or whatever. It was to empower us with the power of that animal. Now, in some myths and legends, those skins had to be magic. Just generally, anthropologically, it was believed that if you wore the skin, you could add to yourself those elements of the animal that you wore. But as far as historical referencing of, werewolves and shapeshifters, the earliest written Now, the earliest piece of written history actually goes back to Mesopotamia and what is known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. This ancient stone tablet that has this epic tale written on it that's lasted thousands of years. This is the first.
I'm excited.
This is the first written element of Gilgamesh. Of the werewolf, and it literally says that Gilgamesh, this is all it's written in it, is Gilgamesh rejected bedding a woman because this woman had turned her ex-lover into a wolf.
Huh.
She had cursed an ex-lover and turned him into a wolf.
Yeah.
So Gilgamesh, nope, no thank you, not messing with
Things about Gilgamesh entertain and excite me because he is a big part of Final Fantasy. So everyone's like, Gilgamesh. And I'm like, oh, Gilgamesh. I don't know a lot about him, but I'm excited.
Don't think it's the same Gilgamesh.
I mean, the whole thing about Final Fantasy is they take names from history, usually gods or very famous stories, and then form a character around them. Yeah. So the Gilgamesh I'm speaking of is probably this Gilgamesh. Mm-hmm. But it's more they took his name in one Final Fantasy. He's a summon, and I think he's part of a storyline in Final Fantasy 14, but I haven't done that storyline, so I don't know. And I believe he is a major boss in Final Fantasy 5, the one with the really big bridge. I think is 5.
7?
No, it's an older one.
Okay. No clue.
I believe it's 5 because it's the one where you have to go across that bridge 3 times and fight him all 3 times because you're changing time or some shit. It's one of the ones I haven't played.
Okay. I'm not sure. No idea. I'll pass on that one.
Either way.
But yeah, I mean, that was the first written aspect of werewolf. Then there are, I mean, regional tales, and most of them are, when you look at them, it's just probably, yeah, there was some wolves, they killed a bunch of people, and, you know, townsfolk kind of went a little bit nuts. But as far as written historical stuff, I mean, yes, there was that story from 1200s or 1100s in France, but it was just a story. It wasn't actually supposed to be real.
Yeah.
However, around the same time as the witch hunts, and at around the same time that the vampire frenzy was going through Eastern Europe, there was a werewolf frenzy going through Northern Europe, Northern and Western Europe. And it literally led to, coinciding with the witch hunts and the vampire hunts, what were known as the werewolf hunts. And
So
people
great
that were people who were believed to be werewolves were tried as werewolves.
I can just imagine you trying a werewolf. He just goes full werewolf and just eats everybody in the room. Well, that went well.
Yeah. I mean, if it was a real werewolf and in that hybrid or even wolf form, trying to interrogate them would be unpleasant for the interrogator.
Yeah.
However, as with most of, again, the witch trials, and these were normally innocent people who might have been a little quirky or maybe used some old magics or old medicines or something along those lines, and they were accused.
Or literally their neighbor just didn't like them for some stupid reason.
Yeah. However, the test for being a werewolf wasn't quite as deadly as for the witches.
That's something at least.
Yeah, to find out if you were a werewolf, they would just peel off some of your skin to see if there was fur on the inside.
I'm sorry. Depending on how much they're peeling off, I think I'd rather take the witch ones.
Yeah, it depends. Well, depending, don't. I've got a lot of old traumas around the whole burning thing, but yeah, drown me or throw me off a cliff or drown me rather than peeling off my skin. Thank you. But the whole belief is the werewolf turned inside out. And so when they became human again, all their fur was on the inside. So you just have to peel off a big chunk of their skin and you'll find out whether or not they were actually a werewolf. This was really big in France. For some reason, and there was some elements of werewolf hunts and things like that that were taking place not recently, but not that long ago. So it's really, like the witch hunts and things. Some of our ancestors were messed up, seriously messed up people.
Yeah, very messed up.
But as with these stories, especially in France, that the werewolf folktale started to rise, more and more killers started saying and declaring it and making think, I'm a werewolf, that's why I did it.
Well, yeah, because, if you were found guilty of killing somebody, they'd hang you. If you were found guilty of being a werewolf, they'd just cut a chunk of your skin off and flip it inside out.
No, this actually wasn't about people being found of being guilty. These were murderers, noted murderers declare I'm this creature. So basically there's a couple of stories in particular of some note. Now, I'm of the belief that I don't want to mention these people's names because they don't deserve infamy.
And
it's
that's
a simple fact that they're disgusting human beings and they don't deserve to have their names remembered. Only that there was some disgusting human beings that did some horrific things. But there were these two guys in France in 1521, and they claimed that they had made a pact with the devil, and they had an ointment that turned them into wolves. And when they were in their wolf forms, they committed these heinous acts. What were their heinous acts? They killed and ate children.
Jeez.
And were ultimately burnt at the stake, because again, werewolves, witches, fire was seen as a way to kill.
It's a purifier.
To kill the werewolf. Yeah, exactly. It will destroy that. So they burnt them at the stake. There was another story in 16th century, and this guy just ended up becoming known as the Werewolf of Dole, or Dole. He also used an ointment, supposedly, to turn him into a wolf. He also killed and ate children, and was also burnt at the stake.
One, whoever's selling these ointments is a genius. You want to kill and eat children? I got the ointment for you.
Yeah, just declare that you're a werewolf. Of course, it doesn't save you or anything. They'll still burn you at the stake, but whatever. Now, this name I will mention because there was in Germany in 1589, a man by the name of Peter Stump was tried and executed for cannibalism and the murder of over a dozen people.
Yay.
Now, in the lead up to Peter's execution, the local folklore had said a giant wolf-like creature had been terrorizing the town, killing livestock, killing people, and generally being a menace.
Yeah.
Now, some hunters had gone out hunting for this creature and supposedly had seen Peter turn into the wolf, or the wolf turn into Peter, one or the other.
Yeah.
And so they tortured him until he confessed for many days.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually, apparently, confessed that he had a belt that turned him into a wolf. Now, the belt was never found. No wolf skin belt was ever found. So it's one of those, again, witch hunts. This poor guy caught the wrong place at the wrong time.
It was probably the hunters.
Probably. It was probably just a wolf. Or a pack of wolves. You know, these creatures are deadly. Catch them at the wrong time, or you're vulnerable, or whatever. They could kill you very, very easily. In those days, it just happened all the time. But poor old Peter. Yep, he got the rough treatment. They tortured him for days, and of course, they torture you for days, you'll confess to anything they want.
Yeah.
You'll say anything they want in order to get it to stop. It's like, death is going to be a better option for me than just kill me. Just end it. End it now.
The book series I was reading recently has a bunch of the Inquisition in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fictional land, so they're not the Spanish Inquisition, but they're the Spanish Inquisition. And there's even a quote one of the characters says. He looks at the person, he goes, "Do you confess?" And the guy goes, "I'm innocent." He goes, "That's not what I asked. I asked if you confess."
Yeah. and that is the true problem with torture, is you will never get the truth. You will get what you want to hear eventually.
Yeah.
But it won't necessarily be the truth.
Yeah, that's kind of a big part of that book, is the Inquisition is a little crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was. I mean, it all started because of this book this one priest wrote. It was insane, but that's for our special witch.
We digress. Yeah,
that's our witch episode, and we will talk that later.
We're discussing the Spanish Inquisition in our witch episode?
Of course.
I am excited as shit.
You cannot talk about you cannot talk more about the witches without talking about the Inquisition, because it was the fuel behind the burnings.
Yeah.
And a lot of the misconceptions again come from that, but again, we digress. There are loads and loads of stories through Europe, same kind of deals. Somebody was a killer, declared themselves to be a werewolf, declared themselves to be some kind of beast, I don't even think they ever wanted or expected to get away with it. It was just them declaring. Yeah. There is also some reports that some of these people might have had rabies.
Yes, I've heard that a lot.
So again, they went feral. They become animalistic.
And foaming at the mouth.
And so people assume they're becoming an animal or transforming. And again, you get someone in those days who's been out in the woods for a few days, is dirty and covered in mud and all. People don't know. In those days, they had no clue. So you see it from a distance.
Somebody who's particularly hairy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is that disease as well, or that genetic condition where people grow hair all over their body. Forgive me, I did not write that down because I do not see that as shape-shifting or werewolf. That is just a horrific. It is horrific that these people get lumped into that when it is just
Yeah.
a genetic condition.
Yeah.
Lots of hair, whatever.
I just go through razors a little faster. That's all.
Exactly. There is also an interesting story. Now, it's not a shapeshifter story, but I'm going to throw it in there anyway, just out of sheer interest. In 1725, Peter the Wolf Boy was found in one of the German forests. And they just found this young boy alone in the forest, running around on all fours. And he was called Peter the Wolf Boy, and it was said he was either adopted by wolves or raised by wolves, or his parents were werewolves, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
He didn't speak his entire life, I believe. It was a mute. They saw him as some great novelty, and eventually King George I and then his son King George II kept him as a pet.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, 1700s. Yeah, so whether or not this was some child that was lost or because he had some issues, he was abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
He gets discovered, and it's like, oh, look at this poor creature. Yes, let's keep him as a pet. Now, how well he was kept as a pet, I have no clue. I couldn't find anything on that, but it was just, royalty in the old days were weird, inbred people.
Yeah.
Modern day, as they've kind of evolved in our story, I mean, they haven't really shifted much from the old legends in the moon aspect is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Because I actually can't find anything in any true werewolf lore that legitimately ties them to the moon.
Yeah, I think that comes later with lunatics and whatnot. People who go a little crazier when the moon is full and whatnot, and they lump that in with werewolf lore. Like that got tacked on to the side.
It was one of those, because people go crazy on the full moon. Now, there's a lot of studies that has been done around this. There's a lot that kind of shows there isn't a correlation to the full moon and crazy shenanigans and things. But you talk to a police officer and you talk to somebody who works in an emergency room, and they will tell you the weirdest things always happen on a full moon if it's the weekend.
Yep.
If the full moon falls on a Friday or a Saturday night, they get the weirdest stuff in. It's not necessarily worse, but it's always
stranger.
Weird.
Yep.
There's a weird story that goes around in it. So part of it comes from, because the word lunatic was originally because they thought the moon made people crazy.
Yep. Yeah.
It's also the wrong idea of old world that the wolf would only howl on the full moon. Now, of course, that's not true. Wolf will howl whenever it damn well wants to howl.
Yes, especially because they howl to let each other know where they are, especially when they're hunting.
Yeah, it's communication, it's dynamics, territorial, all sorts of different things. But again, superstition, old days. So the werewolf got tied into the full moon. When they see the full moon, they naturally turn. Now, the Harry Potter world is interesting where they cover this because they actually have two very different drives. They have the werewolf, like Professor Lupin, and the bad guy, I forget his name, from later on, one of the bad werewolves that works with Voldemort.
I don't remember.
Yeah, and when, I mean, even Lupin, who is this lovely, lovely character, when he turns, becomes this horrific monster.
Yeah.
Whereas you get an animagus, which I think is a term that Harry Potter conned kind of itself.
Yeah. A brown wizard.
Just a wizard who could turn into an animal. Professor McGonagall could become the cat.
Yeah. Sorry, that term, the brown wizard, comes from, I think, it's a derivative from, what's his name from Lord of the Rings? The whatever the brown.
Gandalf.
Well, it's Gandalf the White, and then Gandalf the Gray, then
Gandalf the
Gandalf the
Grey.
White. But
Yep.
there was another wizard, at least in the movies. He might not have been in the books because I haven't fully read the books, but he was a brown wizard who dealt with animals. Like that's what he just did.
Might have been the Hobbit saga then, because I do not recall it in the Lord of the Rings saga, but I
Yeah,
haven't watched the Hobbit saga, so
I know it's in the movie. I can't remember if it was in the books though.
eh, don't know.
I don't know. I just know brown mage or green mage, but brown mage is usually what I hear is a term, and I don't know. Apparently I don't know its origins. But it is for somebody who uses magic that transforms them into animals or like deals specifically with animals.
Which we would look more generally as druidic, because in
Yep.
D&D, the druid class is the class that can
Yep.
transform and
Yeah.
shapeshift, separate to the wares, of course, because you can
Mhm.
get the Therian,
Lycanthropy. Yep.
yeah, or Therianthropy.
Yes. And the term brown refers to the fur because a lot of animals have brown fur. That's why they're called brown wizards.
That's fair. I would have just thought earthy sort of color, so it's that brown.
Fair.
The modern day, when we look at the shapeshifters and that, we see it's an interesting thing, because in modern day storytelling, when someone transforms as a shapeshifter or a were into an animal, generally speaking, that animal tends to be bigger than a normal version of that animal.
Yep.
So, if it, a good 20 to 50% bigger than
Yep.
what the animal would be naturally in the wild. Again, depends upon the lore, depends on the story.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, you'll see the animals a little bit bigger, which I feel kind of defeats if wares and shifters were naturally to evolve, you wouldn't want them to be distinguishable
From
from
other animals.
other animals. I mean, that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, you wouldn't evolve like that. Would be an evolutionary trait that would work against you, which is not how evolution works. So yes,
Exactly.
if wares were to evolve naturally, you would not be bigger.
And if they were bigger, it would be within acceptable dynamics for the
Yeah.
species. So it's like,
Yes.
it's not going to be a massive, massive mutant version of it, but rather a slightly bigger, huskier, healthier version of. That kind of makes sense. Now, again, depending
Mm-hmm.
upon the law, you've
Yep.
got your how they transform. Some will only transform, from human form straight to animal form.
Yep.
Others will have the hybrid,
Yep.
the man wolf kind of form that goes in there. And I mean, in again, certain stories and certain law, some can just shift one part of their body. Like they can
Mm-hmm.
transform their hand to get their claws to slash at somebody if they wanted to. They can, delve deep into and tap into things like their olfactory, their ability to smell.
Yeah.
They have got access to some of their animal traits in human form. Not as clear,
Yep.
but the traits are there.
Yeah. Which you could argue that Wolverine is part animal at that point then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's. I loved Wolverine. Wolverine was always one of my favorites. Absolutely loved him.
He was until his clone came around. I actually like X-23 more. But
No, I still loved Wolverine. But
yeah.
yes, there is that he is very animalistic. Sabretooth even more so.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Yeah.
more so. I mean, they had in the comics anyway. They had Wendigo as well.
Yeah.
Wolfsbane was also in there. There was a whole bunch of animalistic shape-shifting type
Yeah.
mutants. It was. I mean, let's face it. It's a big strain in the mutant world to have the
Yep.
animal
Toad.
aspect. Toad. Yeah.
The least of the animal shape characters. Toad.
No, Toads are bastards, though.
Yeah, that's why I made the joke. Um,
But yeah.
yeah, you touched a bit on the moon cycles and stuff, and a lot of this. Every time you kind of bring something more up, think back to Werewolf the Apocalypse. Um, Werewolf the Apocalypse was another book in the World of Darkness series, which is where Vampire the Masquerade comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another role playing game, and it's one where you play werewolves. Hence the name Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of interesting things, like they talk about your birth origin, and by that I mean what your parents were are a big part of what gives you power. And they were very in that one. They're very like shamanistic or druidic.
Yeah.
Like they have magic based on nature. They can see nature, and it's really interesting because they talk about when they go into a big city, due to the internet and the way people work as people, when you slip into the spiritual realm, it's a bunch of giant mechanical spiders
Yay.
weaving everything together, and they hate going into it. But one of the they have two different clans. They're not clans. I forget what they were called in Werewolf. Basically the classes though. One was Glasswalker, which liked to be in cities, and the other was basically you were a homeless beggar wolf. So you learned a skill like you would roll on your back and expose your belly so people would like you more. Which was really funny. But no, they talk about in there, they talk about depending on what cycle of the moon you were born under changes your power set too. And like if one of your parents has to be a werewolf, and then the other one is either a wolf, a human, or another werewolf, and depending on which of the three you get, it changes like how powerful you are in this way or the other. And it's things like if your other parent was a wolf, you're much more animalistic. You were raised by wolves until you changed. And then when you changed, you were picked up by the werewolf group and taught how to be a werewolf. But they have a tendency to be more animalistic. They tend to not speak as much. They're usually more combat focused. If your other parent was human, you would be able to talk more fluently. You were raised at humans until your first transformation, stuff like that, and you're more civilized as a werewolf. If your other parent was a werewolf, you're a freak. Like you're sterile, you are born hairless, you are very powerful in the magics, but kind of weak in everything else. And you're shunned and hated by your entire community.
Joy.
So yeah, I really want to play that entire system. Like hand me any of those books and I'd like to play one. I'd like to play a mixed ones. But in there, what's interesting is werewolves hate vampires because werewolves are natural and vampires are not. And so they're an affront to they both have the beast within them, but vampires are an affront to nature where werewolves are a part of nature.
Interesting.
And a lot of the werewolves in that campaign, like most of the setting ideas and whatnot, you're kind of eco-terrorists. Like werewolves hate machines and the modern world, and so you end up like trashing them a lot of the time. It's weird. It's really weird. I was gonna say they made a video game recently, and like the only trailer I remember from it was a man turning into a werewolf and destroying a construction yard.
I mean, the name of the game did pop up while I was doing some research, but it is interesting that you brought up vampires and werewolves, because we see this a lot in our modern pop culture. I mean, Underworld was a huge movie franchise. Twilight did it as well, where the vampires and the werewolves were against each other.
Yep.
Now, where the origins of this comes from, there legitimately really isn't any. It's just a construct of modern day pop culture.
Yeah.
Simply, you've got two great supernatural monsters. What better than to pit them against each other?
Yep.
Now, the way that it's often depicted, and this is something again that is brought up in the Anita Blake series, that vampires are death and
Yeah.
shapeshifters are life. It's almost
Yes.
like they have
That's.
an abundance of life, excessive
Mhm.
amounts of life force,
Yep.
whereas vampires are undead.
Yeah, that's kind of how Werewolf looks at it too. But they
Yeah,
also look at it, like I said, that one is natural, the other is unnatural.
yeah. Um, but again, how they've been portrayed now is they're always these big, muscular, sexy, alpha type personalities.
Hmm.
And they have this appeal to us because there's this wildness.
Yep.
The alpha, the wild, they tend to be rough and rugged and outdoorsy, and all those natural nature related type things, but having that wildness on top of it, which we often find very attractive and very appealing. So
Yeah.
again, they've sexualized it. But where the
Yeah.
vampires appealed more to the emos, the wares and the shifters and things like that, it's more the outdoorsy, the nature, the life energy type things. I want to say jocks
Hmm.
and stuff, but it doesn't quite fit. But
Not quite.
it's more physical for those who
Yeah.
are and live more from the physical, whereas vampire tends to be more mind and emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much rage.
Yeah, temper is tied into the shapeshifter a lot. It's a common element of law. If you lose your temper, you are at risk of shifting.
Yep.
Again, the newer you are, if you are a werewolf or a shapeshifter that has been recently turned, your control tends to be lacking.
Weak. Yep. Weaker.
Yeah, there's a lot that says you need to be in the company of others of your kind so they can teach you how not to
Hmm.
kill people.
Yep. Well, in D&D, werewolves are always evil because to remain a werewolf, you have to kill people. You have to at least kill one person. But
And that again goes against how, it's that aspect is different to the law
yeah.
because it's just, yeah, once you turn, that's it, you're done. And again,
Uh,
a lot of the modern movies have, or the modern series have not just, again, werewolves, but all the different types of shapeshifters.
yeah, and like you say, they're trying to romanticize them now. I know my wife reads mostly romance novels, and a lot of them recently have been about shifters finding their true mates and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot about the mating again. The Anita Blake saga. There's what they call the finding the mate, especially for the alphas.
Yep.
Finding their alpha mate was a big thing about connecting again, the romance, the life, but those ones also always tend to be a little bit more volatile. It's interesting that it has that wild elements in those relationships where there's expected to be elements of fighting, sometimes with
Yeah.
blood drawing, whereas the
Yeah.
vampire love story tends to be much more completely consuming each other. They're
Hmm.
wrapped up. The whole world is wrapped up in each other. So that tends to be the difference. That also the shifters too tend to be more, well, I won't say more promiscuous in that way, but the animalistic as they can have more than one mate. Again,
Yeah, depending on the story.
depending on the story, depending upon the law.
Hmm.
Um, yes, as far as pop culture goes, though, there's a lot more movies and books around shapeshifters than there are games. I've noticed there wasn't a
Yeah.
lot of games, unlike Vampire, which had a few different whole like themes around vampire. Not
Yeah.
so much in the werewolf genre. I mean, I remember Altered Beast, but I don't know if you'd classify that as a.
No, that barely counts. Like I
Yeah,
said, they just
that barely
recently
counts as
came.
a game. It's so old.
Yeah. They just recently created a Werewolf the Apocalypse game for PC that I was talking about, which is just a bunch of scenes of you destroying construction equipment. I went, about that.
But then, your tabletop RPGs will often have wares and shifters in your stories. Whether or not you can become one is up to your GM.
Yeah.
And the storyline, obviously, that you're playing, and whether or not they're good or not. Yeah, the were tigers. I'm a tiger girl. I love my were tigers, and it was actually one of the big things that killed True Blood for me. I put up with it for a while, even though it did really go off against the books. It really went against the books. I kept up with the TV series, but when I found out that they weren't bringing in the were tiger and we're just going to use Alcide, I thought, nah, that's it, I'm out. I was looking forward to the were tiger. The way he was written in, it would have been the Rock with purple eyes. It's just like I was looking forward to that, but they didn't bring in the were tiger, and it's just like, oh.
And almost nowhere has werebears.
No, but there is, again, I think it's one of the Anita Blake books that werebears are brought in.
Yeah.
But they don't have a big mention. It is one of the Therianthrope strains she does not carry.
Yeah.
Because she's been infected by most of them, but bear is not one of them.
I want to be a werebear.
Well, this is one of the things let's face it, most of us would love to be able to take on that kind of power in some form. Yeah. I mean, most of us would love the opportunity to fly away from time to time. This is where the shifter dreams originally came from.
So based upon everything we've been talking about, I am curious on if the Hulk classifies as a were.
I don't know about a were, because he would then be a were.
Yeah, he'd be a were.
He'd be a were because he's a were. A man.
Human?
Man?
Wereman? Yeah. I mean, he does transform from one thing into another.
So he definitely qualifies as a shapeshifter because his shape has been shifted.
Fair enough.
But I don't think he would technically be a were, because he would just be a were.
I'm okay with calling him a were.
That'd work. So does that make oh no, because he's a raccoon. I was going to make the joke about Rocket.
Yeah, except Rocket doesn't actually transform. He's just a raccoon.
He's just a raccoon. I was going to make some other gag, but it didn't work. My brain didn't want to follow that path anyway.
Happens. He's just it's not surgically, cybernetically enhanced raccoon.
Yep, that's right. But yeah, I mean, TV shows and movies, Teen Wolf. Oh, God, I grew up when Teen Wolf. Now we're talking the one with Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
The really, really old tacky Teen Wolf. That was huge back in the day. Huge.
There's also American Werewolf in Paris, I think, was another.
American Werewolf in London was the big one. I think Paris. There might have been a spin-off there.
I remember there being an American Werewolf in Paris. Whether or not that's just in my brain, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there was the Michael Jackson Thriller video where he turned into a werewolf at one part, because it's funny because he does this zombie dance thing and then he turns into a werewolf. So, what are you then?
He's a werewolf necromancer.
Obviously.
He does the dance to raise the dead and then turns into a werewolf. He is the ultimate bad guy.
Dear me. But look, we love the werewolves. I mean, yes, they have been modern day sexualized. We love their alpha, they're rugged, they're wild, the wild aspects of their nature. But they are also very, very tied into birth and death and rebirth.
Yeah.
Because it's like each time they change form, it's the death of one form and the rebirth of another.
Yep.
But also, again, it tying into those original legends where someone was trapped or they were going to die or they needed to escape and they were transformed into this creature that allowed them to escape. Now, a lot of those stories, they were that creature from then on, but so they ended one life and were reborn. as something else.
Speaking of shapeshifting to change, there's actually a Norse story about when Idun was captured by a giant because he wanted to steal her apples. She transforms into a hazelnut.
Okay.
To be carried away by Loki, who is transformed into a falcon using Freya's cape. Why Loki needs Freya's cape to turn into a falcon is one of the weirdest parts of that story.
Again, goes to show the inconsistencies because of regional and, timelines and things.
Yes, and then later he just turns into a salmon because.
Those old evolutions.
Yeah.
But, I mean, even today, there is still those who practice the old traditions. I mean, there are still old world medicine men and medicine women. There are still old world shamans. There are some that work in the modern world, and there are some that are still tribal. Not many, but they're still out there, and they still shapeshift, but they do not shapeshift in the physical sense. If you have the discipline, if you meditate, you can shapeshift. You can transform your soul into being whatever shape, whatever form serves you in that moment. Dream walking, it's visions, going on a vision walk or a vision journey or a spirit walk or a soul journey, where literally you can disconnect from your body and allow your soul to take whatever form it takes.
I was reading a little bit about that when I was looking up the bear-skinned and the berserkers and whatnot. Norse shamans and druids would spirit walk and turn, like, leave their body and inhabit the body of an animal, or change their soul into the form of an animal, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Astral projection. Basically, it's astral projection and assuming whatever form your soul chooses to assume, or controlling and choosing the form you wish to assume. It is something that can be done with enough meditation, with the right kinds of focus. If you can concentrate hard enough. You can argue as much as you want that, yes, it's all in your imagination. But the thing is if it's done right, it is a real experience. Whether it is something that you just envisioned in your mind, or whether your soul truly does take the form of an eagle and soars through the clouds, whether your soul does take the form of a bear and walk through the mountains, whether your soul does take the form of a dolphin and swim in the sea, or whether it's just your mind taking you on a powerful journey that helps awaken and enlivening you, has the same effect. And it is still incredibly powerful experience. So you can do it as a way to empower your psyche on a psychological level, or you can do it as a way to connect deeply to the soul of an animal on a spiritual level. It serves either way. It serves both ways. You can do it both at the same time. You don't even have to pick one. You can be trying to do it all logically, and all of a sudden you have this journey that you cannot logic away. Awesome. Yeah. Absolutely awesome. But it does allow us to connect. It allows us to connect into and have this deep rapport with nature, with the animal kingdom. However, there is another type of kind of shapeshifter that most of us, we actually come across on a regular basis, and some of us actually are. Empaths are natural, energetic shapeshifters because of the ability to adapt to any situation that they are put in. These are the people, and I know myself, I can get along with virtually any group of people. You throw me in with the riffraff and I get rough. I can ochre it, as the Australian term goes, I can ochre it up with the best of them. I can talk bogan. I can sit there and, have deep conversations with bogans and have a great time and fully integrate into that. The same with upper class. I can do that too, and everywhere in between, because I'm energetic and I can read what is needed in the situation and how to fit into that situation.
Yeah.
Our ability to flow, to energetically be what we need to be at that time. Now, the problem is, of course, if you're not cautious with that, then you can actually end up getting energetically caught up in those situations. And that can cause you some exhaustion, some problems. It can take its toll. And I'm certainly not saying do this rather than speaking your truth. I truly believe it is far, far better to just be yourself in all situations. But the ability to adapt, especially if you're working professionally, or especially if a certain circumstance just requires it of you, because as authentic and as honest as we need to be as who we are, sometimes we need to also be respectful to a situation.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can use our natural ability to adapt, to shapeshift, to metamorph into what is needed in that exact moment. And that's also to keep in mind that there are people out there who are legitimately fake, and we can usually spot them, but not everyone who can adapt that easily is being fake. They are just riding the energies.
So, yeah, that's our episode this week. Have a lovely day.
You take care.